All right, let's dive into something a little different today. We're going to
Oh,
be talking about uh, an audio drama series.
interesting.
Yeah, it's called Detective H2O.
Detective H2O.
Detective H2O.
Okay.
And it's this really fascinating series that combines industrial water treatment with this kind of like a true crime
Okay.
feel.
Well, I like it already.
Yeah, so we've got a whole stack of Detective H2O stories here from the Industrial Water Science website. And it's just incredible how they've taken this,
Oh, I'm familiar with that site. Yeah.
a subject that could be considered, kind of dry and technical.
Yeah.
And they've turned it into these really gripping narratives.
It's like Sherlock Holmes meets water chemistry.
Exactly. So before we get into the cases, let's introduce our detective, right?
Hmm.
Who is this Detective H2O?
Well, he's Herbert Henry Oxidane, PI, CWT, a water sleuth extraordinaire.
Okay, so he's not just a detective, he's also a certified water technologist.
He is, which means he really knows his stuff when it comes to water treatment.
That's perfect for this kind of series.
Oh, absolutely. His expertise is woven into every case, but it's presented in a way that's engaging and entertaining, even if you're not a water expert yourself.
I love it. So what kind of cases does he take on? Give us a taste of what these audio dramas are all about.
All right, well, let's start with the case of breaking free. This one takes us to a pork processing plant that's having all sorts of trouble with their RO system.
RO, that's reverse osmosis.
Exactly. It's a common filtration method used to purify water.
I've even seen those systems for home.
Absolutely. But in this case, the plant's RO system is constantly fouling, and they can't figure out why. They're convinced their chlorine levels are perfect.
Okay, so where does the mystery come in?
Well, Detective H2O steps in and discovers that the chlorine test itself is misleading. Turns out there's ammonia in the water, creating chloramines, which are interfering with the test results.
A case of mistaken identity.
Precisely. And it highlights how important it is to really understand the chemistry involved. Chloramines might have some disinfectant properties, but they're not as effective as free chlorine for this particular application, which is why that RO system was struggling.
So it's not just about following the steps, it's about knowing what those steps actually mean.
Exactly. Detective H2O's approach encourages you to think critically and go beyond the surface level.
I like that. So what other cases can listeners expect to hear?
Well, in the case of the plume to plume, we meet two operators who are at odds over something as seemingly simple as venting a diuretor.
A diuretor, what's that?
It's a device that removes dissolved oxygen from water, which is crucial for preventing corrosion in industrial systems.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's the conflict?
The operators disagree on how much AH to vent. One thinks it's wasteful, the other argues it's crucial.
Sounds like a classic case of too much of a good thing versus better safe than sorry.
Right. And that's where Detective H2O comes in. He settles the debate, but not with an arbitrary rule.
He doesn't just flip a coin.
No. He uses a dissolved oxygen study to demonstrate the impact of proper venting. It's a reminder that sometimes the answer isn't obvious, and you need data to back up your decisions.
So he's not just a detective, he's also a scientist.
He is. And his investigations always highlight the importance of understanding the science behind water treatment.
All right, so we've got mistaken identity and dueling operators. What other kinds of water mysteries does Detective H2O tackle?
Well, in the case of the short-changing dealkalizer, we're transported to a hospital where their dealkalizer, a system for removing alkalinity from the water, is producing less water than it should.
Okay, so that sounds like a big problem, especially for a hospital.
It is, and they're stumped because everything seems to be in order. No obvious leaks, no equipment malfunctions. It's a real head-scratcher.
So what does our water detective do?
Detective H2O, with his meticulous approach, decides to conduct a condensate survey. Now, condensate is the water that forms when steam cools and condenses back into liquid. It's present in all sorts of systems.
So he's looking for clues in the condensate.
Exactly. And it's in this condensate that he discovers a leaking heat exchanger. It's introducing untreated water into the system, throwing everything off balance.
Wow, so a seemingly isolated problem in one part of the system is affecting the entire operation?
Precisely. This case really showcases the interconnectedness of water systems, and it highlights how important it is to take a holistic approach when troubleshooting. You can't just focus on one component in isolation. You need to consider the entire system.
It's like a puzzle where all the pieces are connected.
Exactly. And Detective H2O is a master at piecing those puzzles together. He doesn't just fix the immediate problem, he teaches valuable lessons along the way.
So tell me about another case that really highlights the importance of thorough investigation.
All right, let's talk about the case of being hammered. This one features Roxy, a tough-as-nails boiler operator dealing with some seriously off-color condensate.
Off-color condensate. That doesn't sound good.
Not at all. It's usually a sign that something is contaminating the system. And Roxy, being the seasoned pro that she is, suspects foul play from the plant operators.
So there's some drama brewing.
Oh, absolutely. But Detective H2O, with his keen eye for detail, discovers the culprit is actually a leaking heat exchanger in a phosphoric acid parts cleaning bath.
Wow, so it wasn't sabotage after all.
Nope, just a case of improper maintenance and material compatibility.
And that's where Detective H2O's expertise really shines.
Hmm.
He's able to identify the root cause of the problem and recommend a solution.
You know, this case really got me thinking about the importance of proper material selection. You have to consider how different chemicals and materials interact with each other to prevent these kinds of issues.
It's like a chemistry experiment gone wrong.
In a way, yes. And that's one of the things that makes these stories so engaging. They take complex concepts and make them relatable through compelling narratives. You're not just learning about water treatment, you're engrossed in a story with relatable characters facing real-world challenges.
I love how these cases weave together the technical and the human aspects of water treatment.
Absolutely. It makes the information stick with you in a way that a textbook or lecture simply can't.
It's a perfect blend of education and entertainment. And speaking of entertainment, let's talk about the case of high irony. This one takes us to Acme Widgets, where they're battling skyrocketing iron levels in their closed-loop system.
Oh yeah, this one's a classic. They're adding more and more treatment chemical, but the iron levels just keep climbing.
They must be thinking they've got some serious corrosion on their hands.
They are. But Detective H2O, ever observant, notices something peculiar.
What's that?
He asks about their iron testing method and discovers they're using the same test they used with their old treatment program. Turns out their new molybdenum-based chemistry interferes with that specific test.
So the iron levels are actually normal, but the wrong test is giving them a completely skewed picture.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how overlooking a seemingly minor detail can lead to major headaches.
And how important it is to choose the right tools for the job. You can't just assume that what worked before will always work.
Right. It's about staying informed and adapting to changing conditions.
It's a great reminder to always question your assumptions. Speaking of questioning assumptions, the case of misdiagnosis is a perfect example of why that's so crucial. In this one, we meet Misty, a cooling tower operator who's convinced she's dealing with massive chlorine demand.
Oh, Misty. She's a character, always running around, trying to keep up with that demanding cooling tower.
So what's the problem this time?
The free chlorine levels in her tower have plummeted, and she's frantically adding more bleach, but the levels just aren't budging.
That sounds like a real nightmare scenario. What's the culprit?
Well, Detective H2O starts by observing, as he always does. He notices some unusual colors in the alkalinity test and a strange white foam on the cooling tower water.
Those are some good clues.
They are, and they lead him to a surprising conclusion. They're actually overfeeding sodium hypochlorite.
Wait, overfeeding. But the chlorine levels are low.
It seems counterintuitive, but the excessive chlorine is actually bleaching out the test results, creating a false reading.
Ah, so the test itself is part of the problem.
Exactly. It's a reminder that sometimes the solution isn't to add more, but to step back and reassess the situation.
And to understand the limitations of our testing methods. We can't just blindly trust the numbers. We need to understand the context.
It's about using data and observation to guide your actions, not just reacting to what you think is happening. And that's a theme that resonates throughout the entire Detective H2O series.
It's all about critical thinking and problem solving, which are essential skills in any field, not just water treatment.
Absolutely. And these stories provide a fun and engaging way to develop those skills.
So we've covered mistaken identity, dueling operators, hidden leaks, and misleading test results. What other water mysteries does Detective H2O unravel?
Well, in the case of normalization, he tackles a reverse osmosis system where the operators are struggling to determine when to clean the membranes.
Ah, so it's not just about fixing problems, it's also about optimizing performance.
Exactly. The permeate flow seems steady, but something just feels off.
It's like they know something's not quite right, but they can't put their finger on it.
And that's where Detective H2O and the concept of data normalization come in.
Now, data normalization, that sounds a bit technical. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Reverse osmosis performance is affected by all sorts of factors. Temperature, pressure, the amount of dissolved solids in the water. Normalization lets you account for those variations to get a more accurate picture of the membrane's true performance.
So it's like adjusting for inflation when you're comparing prices over time. You need a common baseline.
Precisely. By normalizing the data, Detective H2O reveals that the RO system is actually fouling, but the effects are being masked by changes in other variables.
Wow. So the data was there all along, but they needed the right tools to interpret it.
Exactly. And that's one of the key takeaways from this case, the importance of data analysis in optimizing water treatment processes.
It's amazing how data can unlock these hidden trends and help us make better decisions.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for your water system.
I love that analogy. All right, so we've seen how Detective H2O uses his expertise to solve mysteries, optimize performance, and even debunk misleading data. But what about the human side of these stories? What can listeners learn about the people who work in water treatment?
Well, these stories are full of relatable characters who are passionate about their work. They're dedicated to ensuring the safety and reliability of our water systems, even if it means working long hours and dealing with challenging situations.
It sounds like they're the unsung heroes of our modern world.
They really are. And these stories give them a voice, showcasing their expertise and their commitment to a vital but often overlooked field.
It's a reminder that even in a field that might seem technical or even mundane, there are stories to be told, mysteries to be solved, and lessons to be learned.
Exactly. And Detective H2O is the perfect guide to this fascinating world. He's not just a detective, he's a teacher, a mentor, and a champion for the importance of water treatment.
I love that. So, for those of you who might be thinking water treatment sounds a bit niche, I urge you to give Detective H2O a listen. You might be surprised at how quickly you get hooked on the mysteries, the characters, and the fascinating world of industrial water treatment.
It's a great reminder that even in the most seemingly mundane subjects, there's always a story to be told, a mystery to be solved, and a lesson to be learned.
And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to learn more about the water systems that we all rely on.
You never know where a deep dive might lead you.
Exactly. But before we go any deeper, we need to take a quick break. We'll be back in a moment with more Detective H2O and the intriguing world of industrial water treatment.
And these stories really highlight something important.
What's that?
They emphasize the importance of thinking critically, and not taking things at face value. They really challenge you to question your assumptions and just look a little deeper.
Yeah, you're right. It reminds me of the case of Seeing the Dead, where the seemingly routine process loop is battling this persistent microbial growth.
Oh, yeah, that one.
They're disinfecting and disinfecting, but those microbes just keep coming back.
Right. It's one of those things that seems straightforward, but there's always a hidden twist. Detective H2O, he maps out this entire system and discovers what's called a dead leg.
A dead leg.
Yeah, it's basically a section of pipe with very little flow. So even though they're disinfecting the main system, this dead leg is acting like a little microbial hideout.
Like a safe haven for those microbes?
Exactly. It's almost like if you're trying to get rid of ants in your kitchen, but there's this hidden nest you haven't found.
Oh, that's a great analogy. So what's the takeaway from this case?
It highlights the importance of considering every detail of a system and not just focusing on the obvious problem areas. You really need to think about the entire system as a whole.
And it also reminds us of the challenges of achieving complete disinfection, especially in those complex systems with all those twists and turns.
Right. It's like trying to clean every nook and cranny.
Definitely a case that emphasizes the need for a thorough understanding of your system's layout and potential problem spots. So, speaking of unexpected problems, the case of Standing introduces us to this condensate polisher that's behaving rather oddly.
Yes. The condensate polisher, it's kind of like a super fine filter for your boiler's water supply.
So it's making sure that only the purest water is making it to the boiler to prevent things like scale and corrosion.
Exactly. And in this case, the polisher seems to be working fine, but the boiler conductivity is through the roof.
So there are still impurities getting through.
Right, and that's a big red flag.
So what does Detective H2O find?
Well, he notices that the slow rinse valve on the polisher, it's not functioning properly.
It's malfunctioning.
Yeah, and it seems like a minor thing, but it has this domino effect.
Because that malfunctioning valve allows those salts and other impurities to slip through the polisher and contaminate the boiler feed water.
Precisely. It's one of those cases that really highlights how a small equipment failure can have this cascading effect.
And why regular maintenance is so crucial.
Absolutely. It's funny because at the end of this case, Detective H2O explains his fee for a seemingly simple fix by saying, the rest isn't just for standing there, as you said. The rest is for knowing where to stand.
I love that line. It perfectly sums up the value of experience and expertise.
Exactly. Sometimes knowing where to look and what questions to ask, that's just as important as having the technical skills to fix the problem.
It reminds us that true expertise isn't just about knowing the answers, it's about having the insight to see the bigger picture.
Well said.
So this next case really caught my attention, the case of uncertainty. It tackles these somewhat controversial non-chemical water treatment devices.
Oh, yes. Those devices that claim to eliminate chemicals and reduce water usage.
The ones that often make these bold claims about, solving all your water problems without any harsh chemicals.
Right. But, it's a topic that's often met with a healthy dose of skepticism.
As it should be.
Exactly.
So in this episode, we're introduced to Dr. Kitty Olivia Heisenberg and her revolutionary Heisenberg water conditioner.
A device that claims to harness the power of quantum entanglement to prevent scaling and corrosion and microbial growth.
It does sound a bit far-fetched.
It does, doesn't it?
So how does Detective H2O approach this? Does he just dismiss it outright?
He's definitely skeptical, but instead of jumping to conclusions, he sets up these rigorous monitoring protocols to assess the device's performance.
So he's taking a data-driven approach rather than relying on anecdotal evidence or marketing hype.
Exactly. It's a great example of how to approach these new technologies and these bold claims with a healthy dose of skepticism.
It's about demanding evidence and accountability, especially when it comes to something as essential as our water.
Absolutely. So what happens. The evidence reveals that while water usage does decrease the other problems, the scaling, corrosion, and microbial growth, they all persist.
So the device doesn't live up to its claims.
It doesn't, and despite Dr. Heisenberg's attempts to explain away these issues and President Betzer's initial enthusiasm, the data ultimately speaks for itself.
It's a cautionary tale about the allure of quick fixes and the dangers of believing something just because it sounds impressive.
Right. We need to be critical thinkers and informed consumers and not just take the salesperson's word for it.
Look at the data. Do your research, consult with experts.
Precisely.
So we've talked about dead legs and malfunctioning valves and quantum entanglement gone wrong. What other water mysteries are in store for us?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about a case that really emphasizes the importance of good record keeping. The case of being picture perfect.
Okay, this one sounds intriguing.
It starts with a panicked customer complaining about excessive scale in their boilers during a shutdown. They're convinced the water treatment program is failing them.
Sounds like a familiar scenario.
It does, doesn't it? But Detective H2O, he's got a trick up his sleeve.
What's that?
He pulls out his trusty inspection photos from the previous year.
Photos?
Photos. And guess what? They reveal that the situation has actually improved significantly. Yeah, it turns out that the initial shock of seeing the scale was because it was now detaching a positive sign that the treatment was working.
So things were actually getting better, not worse.
Exactly. And without those photos, the customer wouldn't have realized that things were moving in the right direction.
It's a great reminder that sometimes things can look worse before they get better. And it also highlights the value of documentation, both visual and written, in assessing progress and proving the effectiveness of a water treatment program.
It's all about having that burst line for comparison. Without it, you're just guessing.
Right. You need that evidence to support your observations and decisions.
Precisely.
So we've journeyed through quite a few cases now, each revealing a unique challenge and solution in the world of industrial water treatment. What's fascinating to me is how Detective H2O's approach goes beyond just fixing the immediate problem. He's also teaching us valuable lessons along the way.
I agree. It's not just about the technical aspects, it's about the human element too. We see the dedication of these operators like Roxy and Misty grappling with real-world problems, and we witness Detective H2O's methodical approach to uncovering the truth.
And it's all presented in a way that's both informative and entertaining. You're not just learning about water treatment, you're engrossed in a story.
Exactly. It makes the information stick with you in a way that a textbook or a lecture simply can't.
It's that perfect blend of education and entertainment. But there's another layer to these stories that I find particularly delightful.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
The humor.
Yes, the humor.
It's subtle, but it's there.
Oh, it is Detective H2O's dry wit, Roxy's no-nonsense attitude, even those quirky names, it all adds this layer of lightness.
It makes you feel like you're part of the story, chuckling along as they solve these water mysteries.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what makes the series so effective. It educates, it entertains, and it sparks curiosity.
It makes you want to learn more about this hidden world that impacts all of us.
It does.
So, if you're out there thinking, water treatment sounds a bit niche, I urge you to give Detective H2O a listen. You might be surprised at how quickly you get hooked.
I was.
Yeah, next time you turn on a tap or take a shower, think about all those systems and dedicated professionals working behind the scenes.
It's amazing, isn't it? All that goes into making sure our water is safe and reliable.
It really is. And maybe there's a water mystery lurking right under your own nose.
You never know.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.